I want to do something a little bit different. I had in mind to do something, but the fact is that something happened last night which I want to sort of mention and sort of give some type of perspective of how I'm trying to approach this question. My Rabbi was telling me that he overheard a shir on the tape where the person on the shir was trying to talk about hashgacha pratit, and the person said, and that's why you shouldn't get angry at someone, because you should recognize that everything that happens from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the person who's doing this is just doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making that person do. Therefore, you shouldn't be angry at anyone, because he's just acting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He said, I don't understand how this person can say it. There's the meaning of schar ba'onish. Someone does something, schar ba'onish, you have to accept responsibility. If you think everything is in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then where does responsibility come about? So the fact is we're talking about is that balancing between hashgacha pratis and schar ba'onish, between bechira and everything is ratzon Hashem, is one of the most difficult areas of Jewish hashgacha. Yet, there's such an attempt to simplify it. There's such an attempt in many ways to simplify issues, when in reality, a lot of Torah is complex, almost conflict. The Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, says in one of his articles that there's in the Hegelian thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. There's one construct, then there's an opposite construct, and then there's this idea of synthesis, of melding it together. He says in the Torah perspective, the Rav says in the Torah perspective, there's only the thesis and antithesis. You don't have that synthesis. In many ways, we have to have in our mind a constant, almost conflict, a duality, and with no way of connecting them. They're both there, and it's not easy to reconcile it, to work with it. But they're both both ideas, even though they're in conflict, they're very much part of the Torah perspective. It's very similar to what the Rav actually said on Shabbos. Anyways, so I want to do something in terms of in terms of Moshe Rabbeinu, in terms of the question of speech in Moshe Rabbeinu, and to point out that there's a tremendous complexity in Yetzias Mitzrayim, and what's going on in Yetzias Mitzrayim that is often overlooked by individuals. And I'm going to try and pull this out from the question of Moshe questioning his speech. So the most famous aspect where he questions his speech is in last week's Parsha, in SHMOT. Well, because his argument, he says he says in SHMOT, language, he says, Moshe bi Hashem lo ish dvarim anochi gam izmol gam yishulshom, okay, gam mi'azu d'recha el avadecha ki chavei peh v'chavei lashon anochi. In other words, how can I do this? I have difficulty in talking. So how can I go to Bnei Yisrael to speak to them and so forth? So Chris Baruch Hu basically responds and says, well, you've got a problem with your ability to talk. I'm the one who's in charge of talking. Don't worry about it. And then there's the argument where he basically says, okay, send Aaron. So Chris Baruch Hu says, okay, Aaron can go with you, and he'll be your spokesman. Seems to reconcile the situation. You're concerned about your ability to speak, and okay, the solution is Aaron. The difficulties in this week's Parsha, Vaera, Moshe again brings up the same situation. So in Pasuk, in Perek Vav, Pasuk Beis, he says, "V'yidaber Moshe lifnei Hashem leimor, Hey Bnei Yisrael lo shomar alai ve'ech yishma'eni para v'ani orel sfatayim." Right? I have difficulty in speaking. How could I do this? Right? Now, so the point is, and then this verse is actually repeated. This concept is actually repeated in Perek Vav, Pasuk Lamed. So the fact is Moshe again brings up this issue and says, "I'm orel sfatayim," and the fact is that we've already dealt with this issue. right? Aaron is going to speak for you anyways. And in fact, the truth is, if you go on there, the next passage is Hashem al Moshe el Aaron, Yitzavim al Bnei Yisrael, Vel Pharaoh, Melech Mitzrayim, V'hotzi Bnei Yisrael me'Eretz Mitzrayim. So the fact is, the next passage goes that Kosh Baruch Hu orders Moshe and Aaron to go. So it seems that this continuation of this idea that Aaron is going to be speaking for Moshe anyway. So it's what's Moshe arguing Ani Arol Sfatayim? What's the issue here that he's raising up again? We've already dealt with the issue. We have a solution. Now Moshe is bringing it up again. So that's a question that bothered the Meforshim. Why this second issue? So the fact is that there are two things that are pointed out about the difference between these two arguments. One, and this is in the Ramban, he says the first issue was Moshe going to Bnei Yisrael. Right? First Baruch Hu says, go to Bnei Yisrael, and then he says, okay, take Aaron and there to Bnei Yisrael. So now he's saying, go to Pharaoh. That's what he's saying. He's saying, now it's time, he says, Daber al Paro Melech Mitzrayim, the passage before him, we say, go to Pharaoh and talk. So Moshe then says, listen, I don't know anything about Aaron going to Pharaoh, right? I'm going to Pharaoh, and he brings up the issue that I can't speak so well. And that's why he actually says, okay, Bnei Yisrael didn't hear me, so why do you expect Pharaoh to hear me? Because I have this weakness anyways. Okay, so that's one way of looking at the distinction. The other way of looking at distinction is the fact that the word language is different. Okay, in SHMOS he uses the idea of kavod peh v'kavod lashon anochi. I have difficulty in my lips and my tongue, which is where Meforshim specifically state that he had problems in articulating certain letters or certain sounds that were tied to the tongue or the teeth. Okay, so he would have that was his specific problem in terms of articulation. Okay, so over here though he says ani arol svatayim, right, which means technically uncircumcised lips, but what exactly is his problem here? And that's going to be an issue according to Meforshim, that over here you had one issue and the other one over here is a different issue. Okay, now he's raising a different issue based upon oral time. But the truth is Rashi and Ramban actually see it as the same problem, the same difficulty. So that really is the question between the psukim. But there's a much more basic question. Okay, what exactly is Moshe's issue? Both when he's going to Bnei Yisrael and both when he's going to Pharaoh. What is his issue? What's the problem with him not being able to speak well? What's the problem?
It could be literally that he has trouble speaking. Or I'm saying, he was brought up in Pharaoh's palace. He didn't have a connection with the people, with Israel. So how could he have a connection?
And that's an interesting question, but that's not tied to his speech. You're saying that how?
When he not. Yeah.
Right, but you're raising an issue. What's his relationship to the people? Here's this outsider has been around for many years, right? Even beforehand, he wasn't with the people. There's actually, before someone say this, there's actually a parish that says, I forget who says it, but there's actually before that says that one of his kindness was to Kosh Baruch Hu is that I didn't work with the people. I never was a slave. It's not fair to send me. They're going to look at me and say, you were up there in the palace having a good time over there, and now you're coming to talk to us. You don't know what we've gone through. So Kosh Baruch Hu says, it's interesting because where I saw this it says Aaron HaLevi, and the specific reason why it says Aaron HaLevi is because the Levium also didn't work. So he says, so Kosh Baruch Hu is saying, listen, Aaron's going to go with you, and if you think, and the truth of the matter is that that's the argument that Moshe says, that send Aaron because he works with them. Right, I'm over here, and he says, no, send Aaron. Aaron didn't work with them anyways. This is a lady. So there's that context of it. But you're saying it's more of a social aspect. It's not really a physical thing. It's the fact that he's not with the people. Okay, so that raises that raises part of the question. What exactly is Moshe's issue? Because you're raising an interesting perspective here. The thing is that the issue is a very strange issue. If Moshe is saying, I can't talk, they won't understand me. So that's a pretty good argument. isn't there a point of communicating? Right? I'm to speak to them to communicate. You're telling me to communicate. So, if you're telling me to communicate, so how do I communicate if they're not going to understand me? They're not used to my speech. They're not going to understand me. How can I communicate? If that's his taina, so Kodesh Baruch Hu's answer is, I can make you a communicator. So why didn't he? Right? But let me ask you something. If Moshe was concerned about communication, God's telling him, go speak to the people, why should Moshe be concerned about communication? Shouldn't he recognize that if God wants him to communicate, he will communicate? I mean, Moshe did not understand that this challenge of speech, God could say, hey, I can make you speak better, right? So, what exactly is that dialogue seems a bit strange, to complain about something, but it's like the complaint is irrelevant because you can always fix the complaint. You're talking about God here. So Moshe is not willing to ask God to fix the complaint. Now there are Meforshim that say that this is one of the problems. Moshe should have asked Kodesh Baruch Hu to speak better. Okay, if that's the problem, rather than saying I don't want the job, just say, listen, can you make sure that I speak better? That's part of the problem. But what exactly is the issue here? If he's not able to communicate, he's not able to communicate. So obviously that's a good taina. And if he is able to communicate, what's the problem with him being covered peh, with him having a possibility of speaking, or the problem with speaking? Any suggestions?
Because the Avril time happened in Paro's.
Sorry?
Midrash says that he became a real.
Yeah, that's enough. The Midrash says that actually is by covered peh. It's an interesting question. But the fact is that there was an argument that Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't want to rectify this lack in Moshe because it was a sign of the great miracle that was done for Moshe when he was a baby, according to the Medrash, right? They brought out these two things, gold and a flaming coal, right? And if they said if the baby went for the gold, he was a smart baby, and therefore he's a problem. But if he reaches out for the coal, then see, there's nothing to worry about. What happened was that Moshe was playing on Pharaoh's knees or whatever, and he kept grabbing Pharaoh's crown, right? So because he kept grabbing Pharaoh's crown, they basically said, you see, eventually he's going to try and take over the throne. So we have a problem here. So he says, no, he's just grabbing. He's a kid. He sees something shiny, he's grabbing it. So that's why they gave this test. So actually, Moshe's arm was reaching for the gold, because Moshe was a chacham, but the fact is that Kodesh Baruch Hu made it that Amalek moved his hand over to the coal, and he put the coal in his mouth. Okay, how he picked it up and put the coal in his mouth, I'm not sure, but he put the coal in his mouth, and I think that by the time he touched it, he was not going any further. And that's how he had problems talking. Okay, so the truth is, there are people who say that the Ramban actually says that was a reason why Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't want to fix him right away. But there's an interesting question here in terms of this communication. The fact is if Moshe really has a problem communicating, then the whole mission is impossible. They won't hear me. They won't understand me, right? That's the problem. They won't understand me. If on the other hand, there's another possibility here. The other possibility is they will understand you regardless of how you speak. Right? You can speak, and somehow they say, gee, we understand what this guy's saying. Sounds like mumbling to us, but somehow we're getting the message. That would be a nace. It would be a miracle. And that really was one of Moshe's tainas. He says, if you're telling me it has to be through derech hateva, that a person has to communicate, then we got a problem here. Through derech hateva, I'm not a communicator. I'm not someone who can speak well. People won't understand me. And if you're telling me they'll understand you, don't worry about it. There'll be a miracle, right? So, what do you need me for in the first place? Send whoever you send. Some people say, listen, do it yourself. What do you need all these people for? What do you need me for? You want to take the Jews out? Take them out. You don't want to take the Jews. He actually tells that to Kodesh Baruch Hu. He says, listen, I'm really not necessary. right? If you're going to take him out, it doesn't matter what I do. And if you're not going to take him out, it doesn't matter what I'm going to do anyways. So the challenge is this mixing of derech hateva and nes. And the fact is that this is an issue throughout this topic, but it's an issue throughout Chumash and Tanakh. The balancing of nisim and derech hateva. It's very, very strange to understand. My classic example of that is the story of Eliyahu at Har Carmel, right? And it tells you a mind frame that is like impossible for us to understand if you think about this. Eliyahu is at Har Carmel. Okay, we all know the famous miracle of Eliyahu at Har Carmel, right? So the Nevei Habal, they try to want to bring one of their sacrifices, but they can't light a fire. Whichever deity will light the fire, we know that's a true one, right? So they spend the whole morning dancing, screaming, cutting themselves, doing whatever they can to get. Nothing happens. And Eliyahu was taunting them. You finished yet? Okay, another few minutes. Go ahead. Okay, he's taunting them the whole time, right? Then he says, "You finished already?" Takes some water and says, "Okay, fine." He douses the whole thing in water, and then says basically, "Kodesh Baruch Hu, light my fire," and there's a fire. It's a remarkable miracle. It's a remarkable miracle. The fact that we say Hashem Hu Elokeim, that pasuk is by Eliyahu at Har Carmel. Everyone yelled Hashem Hu Elokeim. It was completely convinced. 1,000 Nevi'ei Habal are killed, totally destroyed, and Achav is standing there. A lot of people was the biggest Russia of the Malchei Yisrael, which means he might have been the biggest Russia ever. I mean, it's a question. Okay, the point is Achav is standing there, and he walks home, and he says, "This is unbelievable." And Eliyahu taunts these guys, not afraid, just does his thing. Achav goes home and tells Zevel what happened. Right? Here's an eyewitness, your husband. Right? We're assuming that she trusted her husband, but the fact is that he comes home and says, "This is remarkable. This is what happened." What's Zevel's response? She gets a messenger, and she says to Eliyahu, she sends this messenger to go to Eliyahu and say, "In 24 hours, you're a dead man. The same way you got rid of the Nevei Habal, within 24 hours, I'm taking care of you." She didn't get the memo? I mean, this is a guy who just taunted 1,000 Nevei Habal and just wiped them out, and you're threatening him? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And what also doesn't make any sense is Eliyahu's response. What does Eliyahu do when the messenger says you're a dead man in 24 hours? He runs to Yehuda. He runs away. He's afraid of Zevel. This happens throughout Tanakh, throughout Torah. This balancing where you have Nisim right there, no doubt about a Kodesh Baruch Hu, Nisim and Niflos. At the same point in time, right, there's the idea of Ein Somchan Al Nes is so powerful that we have to use Derech HaTeva. The point is that this is really part of the issue over here. The question is that if Moshe cannot do it through Derech HaTeva, then what's the point of him doing it? What's his role? On the other hand, if it's Nisim v'Niflos, why is he necessary? And that's a tension that Meforshim are trying to deal with here in terms of what exactly is the role of Moshe Rabbeinu in this issue. What's his role? Okay. So the fact is that really it's an interesting study of the issue of communication. What exactly is this issue of communication? What's Moshe's concern, even al pi derech hateva? Is it the fact that he could not speak? Then there's no chance of derech hateva. Okay, so if it's a concern within derech hateva, what's his concern? Obviously, if you say it's not that he's able to speak, what exactly? If he is able to get across the message, so what's the problem? So it's a little. People have to work a little harder to get the message. You have to listen closer, more closely. You have to pay attention. Maybe it's a little more difficult. But the fact is maybe they couldn't understand, so they have to work a little bit to hear what he's saying. Is that the issue? Moshe doesn't want them to work. So that's the question is, what exactly is Moshe's issue? Not just, if he's throwing it as an excuse for him not to go, okay, fine. But what is his concern here? What would be his concern? So the fact is that it is very much tied, in the first case, to Bnei Yisrael, it's very much tied to a machlokas of what was a Kadosh Baruch Hu's original intent in sending Moshe. When a Kadosh Baruch Hu comes and says, it seems to be Kadosh Baruch Hu comes and says, Moshe, you're going. Okay, Moshe Tainas. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, we'll throw Aaron in as well. So the two of you. So the point that Aaron and Moshe go in the end, is that a compromise? No, that's not really the ideal. It should have been just Moshe, but Moshe made such a fuss, so we'll throw Aaron in. Or was it always HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intent to say Moshe and Aaron? Right? Always that intent. And therefore all that Moshe is doing is highlighting that intent. Any suggestions on that? Okay, you see, it would have been easy. If you would have said like this, I would have said you're like this person. If you said like that, you're like that person. So great when you throw out the machlokas. Everyone ends up happy. You're mechavan to this, mechavan to that. The truth is, I see it as a machlokas, although it's not really presented as well. I see it as machlokas between the Emek Dover and the Malbim on one side, and Rishim Shulchan Hirsch on another. To the Malbim and the Emek Dover, Moshe should have went alone, not with Aaron. That's why he should have went alone. And in fact, I forget which one of them says it. That's why Klal Yisrael suffered the additional aspect of slavery, that they had to make their own bricks, because when Moshe and Aaron first went to Pharaoh, because Moshe should really went alone, and that was a punishment to Moshe. So the question is, why should Moshe have gone alone if he really can't speak well? He says that would have been the nace. Moshe going alone and being a stutterer or being covered peh and doing this thing and being successful, that would have shown that it's totally in the hands of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's not because of Moshe's oratorical skills. It's simply because Moshe is the Eved Hashem and is acting for a Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's one approach. And that approach seems to stress that it would have been a miracle. And what is that approach really pointing out to be the miracle? So it is introducing a second aspect to the aspect of ability to speak. It's not just the ability to articulate. It's the ability to be an orator. You expect the person who's going to try and save Klal Yisrael to be a person who is, at least can speak and sound okay. Okay, and there's a lot of people point out over there that it was Kavod HaMelech. Well, actually, when he went to Klal Yisrael, the fact is, I'm jumping ahead already, when he went over here, it's an aspect that you want to have a person who the people can respect. He speaks well, sounds well. You're about to hire a rabbi, you want a guy who speaks well on Shabbos morning, right? He could be a big Talmid Chacham, right? But doesn't speak so well, so it takes away from his role of being a rabbi. Now, the point of the Emek Dover and the Malbim is, didn't matter because the miracles would have made sure everything's okay. They would have understood him and listened to him anyways, because it would have nisin flows from a Kodesh Baruch Hu that it would have been okay. But the fact is Rishim Shulchan Hirsch pointed out, as Moshe is saying, through Derech HaTeva, this is not the way people are going to respond to just a person who doesn't speak well. People are going to look at him and say, what exactly is the problem here? So he says that's why it was always Aaron had to go with Moshe. Moshe was like in the ivory tower. He was the person who was as he used the language, the conveyor, the knowledge of truth. But to be able to take that knowledge of Torah and be able to express it to the individuals, that you need someone who had the ability to speak, to be a little bit of an orator, a little bit of ability to understand people, and how to tailor a message to the audience. So that was Aaron's idea. So it was always the intent to have Aaron. And the truth is the way you understand in terms of the problem with Moshe, is Moshe wasn't saying, send Aaron with me, Moshe was saying, send Aaron alone. And Kodesh Baruch Hu was basically saying in the end, it's neither of you alone. It's going to be Moshe and Aaron that go together. That's what if you would have said that's fine, but it's not one or the other, because you can't have the orator without substance. Now, not that Aaron didn't have substance. Obviously, Aaron had substance, but the point is that his ability was to take the Torah and bring it down to the masses. So the point is that obviously, though, Moshe Rabbeinu is still the one who's Mekabel the Torah. So therefore, it would be better to have a Moshe Rabbeinu and an Aaron together to come together to express it to the masses, which what Kodesh Baruch Hu eventually did. But we understand over here that there was this idea of communication. It's not just simply the ability to speak in terms of the language of a person or the articulation of the letters, and whether the person can actually speak. If physically he couldn't get across the message, it wouldn't work. It was the context of speaking and the context of the human experience of speaking. Okay, you want to have someone who is able to relate to the audience, speak to the audience, not above the audience, and so forth, or speak in a way that the audience can understand it. Maybe crack a joke in the middle of the audience, something like that. But the fact is that that's where Aaron tipped in, and that was the argument over here. So it had to be a human communication. And the Emek Davar Mama says, no, that would have taken away from the Nes. So there was a tension over here of whether it was more Derech HaTeva or more Nes. And the fact is, you see from the Meforshim that some are saying it was supposed to be more of a Nes, okay, and not the aspect of Derech HaTeva. And there's other people who basically say no, it was always supposed to be Derech HaTeva, and Moshe should have seen that fully that it was going to be through Derech HaTeva. Of course, Baruch Hu would have made sure it would have worked out with Derech HaTeva. He should have worked in this way. The truth is, by both of them going, there was this balancing of both, because Moshe spoke first, and then Aaron spoke. So you look at this and say, what's going on over here? How come the guy who's mumbling is the one who's in charge here, and the one who's a great orator is the one who's not in charge over here? And that itself raises an issue that this is obviously not the way it usually is. Usually the front man who's a good orator, he's usually the guy in charge, right? You see this from politics, right? It's the politician is the one who speaks and gets the people. Then if he's a good leader, he goes home and hires the smart guys, but they're all part of his cabinet, but they're lower than him. It's the other way around. Here, the one who doesn't have who's not the good orator is the one in charge. How do you do that? So it shows a little bit of this Derech HaTeva, but it's also a little bit of miracles. And this is balancing that happened, and this happens throughout this attempt to try and give both messages. So that seems to be one issue of going there, and that was to Klal Yisrael. Even to Klal Yisrael, you're talking to your own people. You have to recognize who they are. It has to be some aspect of Derech HaTeva. And Moshe was just saying, my talking to them, this is not going to create the reaction of getting people behind me through the way I talk. Okay, so he said, all right. What was the problem with Pharaoh? And the fact is that what unfortunately point out is, and this is what Ramban is going to Pharaoh. There was an additional issue. One issue is, as Moshe says, it didn't work with Bnei Israel. You see, we went and we made it worse for them. But more than that, the real pasuk that really Moshe is pointing out to, and it is the pasuk at the end of the Parsha in SHMOS. He says he came before them. Okay, he says to the people. Okay, they came across Moshe, okay, and Moshe tries to say to the people, hey, it'll be all right in the end, and the people say, okay, leave me alone. And some before him say that Moshe originally thought he had to go with Pharaoh by himself, and he says, listen, me going by myself doesn't work, clearly, but it doesn't work with Aaron either. It didn't work. So it's possible Moshe was saying, hey, let's go. Why are you sending me to Pharaoh? It didn't work previously with Bnei Israel. So it's interesting in terms of language or else for time. There's actually different approaches to the pasuk. There's some people say the pasuk Yud Beis Moshe wasn't challenging Kosh Baruch Hu. He was just in his own wonderment. He says, now you're sending me to Pharaoh and I don't speak well. And it didn't work last time. Not that he's okay, you got a plan here? I have no idea what you're doing. That's what he says. That's why Kosh Baruch Hu doesn't respond to him. But he says, I don't understand the plan. There's Sfas Emet says something very interesting over here. He says, Aral Sfatayim, the Pasuk says, okay, Ani Aral Sfatayim, doesn't mean, like in the other case, I don't speak well, right? Therefore, why he's sending it says, it seems that my speaking doesn't work, therefore I'm Aral Sfatayim. In other words, it's not that this is the problem, this is the outcome. I've obviously showed that this system doesn't work. So I'll take responsibility and I'll say, just obviously it's not going to work. They're not listening to me. Okay, and if it's going to be on me, then it means I have a weakness that they're not listening to me. Okay, but the fact is that going to Pharaoh again, he has reasons to say this. Okay, and Rashi says, listen, Bnei Israel, they would have liked my message, and they stopped. They didn't listen to me so well. He's also referring to the fact that the Zignei Israel also dropped off. When Moshe and Aaron originally came, they said, they believed him, and so forth and so forth. And Kosh Baruch Hu's original plan to Moshe was, you're going to go with the elders of the nation, and they'll speak to Pharaoh as well, and they'll do it. The fact is when they finally came before Pharaoh, it was only Moshe and Aaron, so all the elders dropped off. So he says, I didn't do well when those people were liking my message. It didn't work. So how can Pharaoh, who's not going to like my message, how can it work? Even with Aaron, how could it work? Obviously, you don't have a good track record over here. There's also an additional issue. The fact is, and this is also something very interesting in terms of the play of the Malchus over here. Throughout, it seems to be that Moshe and Aaron were very respectful of the Malchus, of Pharaoh, as Melech. There was respect for the office of king. Okay? Even though Pharaoh was a Rasha, there was respect for the fact that he was the king of Egypt. So the point is that there was this other factor where Moshe felt that his stuttering or his speech impediment would not be respectful to the king. And we have to do this in a way that's respectful to the king. So again, Aaron goes with him, and therefore that makes it a little bit more respectful. But Moshe's concern over here is in addition, how is this working if it's not respectful to the king? You know, for some guy to come speak who doesn't speak well. So it's an interesting issue over here, where again we see this aspect where Moshe Rabbeinu is actually concerned about certain principles that are in Derech HaTeva. We got to be respectful of the king. We got to do it right. And the truth is, if you really think about it, it's absolutely remarkable that Kosh Baruch Hu is even bothering with Pharaoh. Why is he going to Pharaoh for? Well, send out my people. Pharaoh, we're leaving tomorrow. Goodbye. Or we're leaving now. Goodbye. With God saying we're leaving. You don't want to stop us? Try. Right? So the fact is that that's what Kosh Baruch Hu could have easily done. What's this whole working with asking and so forth and so forth? So there was an attempt to try and work with certain standards. Right? There was a value of slaves, there was an idea like this, he is still the king, we're going to try and respect and so forth and so forth. And that's the way Moshe and Aaron did it. So while they were doing these miracles, they still seem to work with not just Derech HaTeva, but the principles of Derech HaTeva. One of the things that Kosh Baruch Hu that happened to Pharaoh is Pharaoh really believed that he needed that this God of the Hebrews needed permission, needed my permission, that these were my slaves, and therefore under the moral order of a God, right, he has to ask my permission. He could twist my arm, he could do whatever he wants, but he has to ask my permission. It seems to be what's happening in the plagues. Even with the 10th plague, Pharaoh says, "Okay, you convinced me. You gave me a price I can't refuse, right? So therefore, I'm going to let you go. But you still needed me." The fact is the fact that Pharaoh still thought that he was needed, still represented some aspect, or okay, we're abiding by this general principles and so forth of the world and so forth and so forth. The truth is that's why Kriyas Yansuf is even more powerful. Okay. That's why I always refer to the Ten Commandments. You'll burn his face, and the Ten Commandments is really right on for this. At that point in time, when he says, God is God, he understands that really it was absolutely irrelevant to ask permission, because in the end, they didn't need permission, right? We're going out, you're taking away your permission? Good, we didn't need you. I was toying with you the whole time, which is the extreme of the miraculous side of the Kodesh Baruch Hu. I'm not bound by any rules, even by moral rules, even by other rules. I'm not bound by anything. So it's a complete aspect of the Nes being above Derech HaTeva, which is why Kriyas Yam Suf is considered to be such a remarkable event, that when people saw Kriyas Yam Suf in the Cheskel, didn't see it by the Merkava. So the point is, though, but still, Kodesh Baruch Hu still tried to work with Derech HaTeva. And there's always this tension where beforehand Derech HaTeva try and work with the moral concepts, the ethical concepts, try and deal with you and say, listen, we're trying to go. Even the first idea, hey, listen, you respect gods. We're asking you to allow us to go visit our gods, because in that point in time there still had to be some type of religious freedom, and you guys accept this religious freedom. So when Pharaoh says, I don't know your God, he's basically saying, well, if I would have known your God, I'd give my slaves 5 minutes to pray to their gods. The fact is that there were certain concepts and ideas, and this is the balancing that goes on throughout this idea between the miracles, the miraculous side, the Kol Yochel, Kodesh Baruch Hu do whatever he wants, and this idea that has to be structured with the Derech HaTeva, because through Derech HaTeva we learned concepts. There's only miracles, we can't learn concepts. So one of the concepts is even the idea of Kavod HaMelech, that Moshe felt it's not coveted for the Melech for me to go. Needs someone to go. So Kodesh Baruch Hu says, I'm sending Aaron anyways. You're right. The king, you have to have a regal presence with the king. You can't walk into the king in rags and basically, I don't care who you are. You have to have a certain respect for the kingship. And this is happening throughout the whole story of balancing between Derech HaTeva and the miracles, and the need for both. And the remarkable thing of the players throughout Tanakh, in certain ways, going back and forth between these two worlds, sometimes being mistaken about when one applies or one doesn't apply. That's one of the problems with the Meraglim. Okay, I mean the whole issue with the Meraglim is the fact that it seems almost ridiculous when they say we can't defeat them. Where have you been for the last 40 years? I mean, come on. So the Meraglim felt that we can't rely upon Nisim. Well, we can't rely upon Nisim. So therefore, if we have to do Derech HaTeva, we can't defeat them. They had we analyze the Derech HaTeva, analyze it through Nes. Derech HaTeva, we can't do it. Nes, what do you bother sending us for? So that seems to be the issue. If you look over there by the Meraglim, you'll see that Kalev doesn't say. The first response of Kalev is, we can do it. Which is a statement that if a Kodesh Baruch Hu tells us we can do it, there has to be an idea that we are able to do it through Derech HaTeva. It's a very interesting aspect that the Kalev then says that Kodesh Baruch Hu will take care of it, but his first response is, we can do it. Which says that somehow we have to have an idea that we can do it through Derech HaTeva. Which is a very interesting concept. But the truth is that's happening. So the Meraglim, they're going back and forth in this also. They made a mistake over there and so forth. And you see this issue over here a little bit with Moshe and Aaron. How do you balance the two? If it's a miracle, do Kriyas Yam Suf right now. Let's go. Right? They send out their chariots. What's the problem? If it's not, if you're working Derech HaTeva, well, this is not the way to go to a king, and this is not this, and this is the tension that exists in the story.